What neuroscience found inside Einstein's brain and what it means for yours. Imagine solving a problem that has defeated every other mind on Earth. Not because you think faster, not because you know more, but because you notice something everyone else decided wasn't worth noticing. You sit with a question that others abandoned years ago. You return to it in the morning, in the evening, on a walk, in the silence before sleep. And slowly, through patience and attention and a particular quality of seeing, the answer arrives. Not all at once, as an image, a feeling, a thought experiment that takes 12 years to complete. We call this genius. But what if that word has been wrong all along? For most of human history, we imagine genius as something a person possessed from birth. A larger brain, a faster mind, a gift distributed unevenly by nature, bestowed on a few and withheld from most. We told stories that reinforced this belief. The prodigy who composed symphonies at 5, the mathematician who solved theorems in his sleep, the scientist who simply saw what no one else could see. These stories are seductive because they offer a comfortable explanation. Genius is something you either have or you don't. And if you don't, well, that was decided before you arrived. But here is the problem. When scientists began studying the actual biology of extraordinary minds, measuring, scanning, analyzing, they kept finding something the mythology hadn't prepared them for. The story was almost entirely wrong. Albert Einstein did not speak until he was 2 or 3 years old. He struggled academically. He failed his entrance exam to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School the first time he applied. He spent years working as a patent clerk in Bern, reviewing other people's inventions 8 hours a day, while quietly developing his own ideas in whatever time remained. He was not, by any conventional measure, a prodigy. What he was, from the very beginning, was curious, relentlessly, almost unreasonably curious. He once described asking himself as a child what it would be like to ride alongside a beam of light. Not a practical question, not a useful one, just a question that refused to leave him. He spent roughly a decade carrying it, turning it over, approaching it from different directions, refusing to let it go, simply because no existing framework could answer it. What came out of that decade of sustained wondering was the special theory of relativity. Not from superior processing speed, not from access to information others didn't have, from a question a child asked and an adult refused to abandon. On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein died in Princeton, New Jersey. He had requested that his body be cremated and his ashes scattered at an undisclosed location. He had specifically asked that his brain not be preserved or studied. Within hours of his death, a pathologist named Thomas Harvey removed Einstein's brain during the routine autopsy and kept it. What followed was one of the stranger chapters in the history of science. Harvey sectioned the brain into hundreds of pieces. He photographed it. He distributed samples to researchers. He kept portions in jars in his home for decades, eventually transporting them across the country in a cider box. For 30 years, the brain traveled. Scientists studied it. Papers were published, headlines announced discoveries. And what those researchers actually found, when the sensationalism was set aside, was far more interesting than the headlines suggested. Einstein's brain did not weigh more than average. If anything, it was slightly smaller. What researchers did observe across multiple studies were differences in specific regions. The parietal lobes, associated with spatial reasoning, mathematical thinking, and the integration of information from different senses, showed unusual structural features. A region called the inferior parietal lobule appeared larger and more elaborately folded than in most brains examined. Researchers also noted differences in the corpus callosum, the thick band of neural fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres, suggesting unusually rich communication between the two sides of the brain. Some studies reported higher numbers of glial cells in certain regions, the support cells that nourish and insulate neurons and may play a role in information processing. But here is what every serious neuroscientist who has reviewed this research emphasizes. These findings are suggestive, not conclusive. The sample size is 1, the comparison data is limited, and even if every structural difference were confirmed, no single anatomical feature comes close to explaining the scope of what Einstein accomplished. The brain is not a collection of isolated organs, it is a network. And what matters most about a network is not the size of any one node, it is how everything connects. Genius is not faster thinking, it is deeper seeing. So if Einstein's brain didn't reveal a magic organ, what did decades of studying extraordinary minds actually teach us? Something considerably more useful. It taught us about how he thought. Einstein himself left extensive accounts of his mental life. He described thinking primarily in images and feelings rather than words. When he worked on a problem, he didn't begin by writing equations. He began by visualizing. He imagined situations. He ran mental experiments. He constructed scenarios in his mind with the kind of detail most people reserve for physical experience. The thought experiment about riding alongside a beam of light is the most famous example, but his notebooks reveal dozens of others. He visualized trains and platforms and observers moving at different speeds. He imagined clocks and rulers and the perspective of someone falling freely through space. He was not calculating. He was watching. And current neuroscience offers a compelling explanation for why this worked. The regions of the brain most involved in visual and spatial processing are also heavily implicated in abstract reasoning and mathematical intuition. Research by Stanislas Dehaene and others suggests that mathematical thinking is partly grounded in the same neural systems the brain uses to understand space and quantity in the physical world. When Einstein thought in images, he wasn't taking a shortcut. He was using one of the most powerful cognitive tools the human brain possesses. There is a second quality that neuroscience now recognizes as central to creative and intellectual achievement, something researchers sometimes call sustained attention, but which might be better described as a tolerance for remaining inside a difficult question without forcing a premature answer. Most minds, when confronted with a question they cannot immediately solve, move on. The discomfort of not knowing is resolved by abandoning the question or settling for the nearest available answer. Einstein appeared constitutionally unable to do this. He stayed. He held the question open, sometimes for years, allowing his mind to return to it again and again without demanding a resolution it wasn't ready to provide. Neuroscience has a way of describing what happens during these long periods of seemingly unproductive wondering. The default mode network, a set of brain regions most active when we are not focused on an immediate task, plays a crucial role in creative insight. When the mind appears to be wandering, it is often doing something far more sophisticated. It is making connections between distant ideas, drawing analogies across unrelated domains, allowing associations to form that focused, directed thinking would never have permitted. The long walks Einstein was famous for, The hours spent playing violin, the deliberate rest between periods of intense work. These were not interruptions to his thinking, they were part of it. Your greatest limitation may not be intelligence, it may be the questions you stop asking too soon. Carol Dweck's research on mindset has demonstrated something that sounds simple but has profound implications. People who believe intelligence is fixed, that you either have it or you don't, consistently underperform compared to people who believe intelligence is something that grows through effort and challenge. This is not merely a psychological effect. There is a biological mechanism underneath it. When you engage with difficulty, when you sit with a problem rather than abandoning it, your brain responds by strengthening neural connections, building new pathways, increasing the efficiency of the networks involved. The research of Anders Ericsson across decades of studying expertise showed that what separated extraordinary performers from merely good ones was rarely raw talent. It was the quality and quantity of deliberate practice, the willingness to remain uncomfortable, the discipline to work at the edge of current ability rather than staying safe within it. The brain is not a fixed instrument, it is a living system that reorganizes itself in response to what you demand of it. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself throughout life, is not a metaphor. It is a measurable, documented, biological reality. And it means that the distance between an ordinary mind and an extraordinary one is not a wall, it is a practice. So what, practically, can be taken from this? Not the instruction to become Einstein. That would be as useful as telling someone to become Simonides. But there are genuine neuroscience-grounded practices that reshape how a mind works. Ask longer questions. Not the questions that are easy to answer, but the ones that stay uncomfortable. The questions that keep returning after you thought you'd set them aside. Protect periods of deep, undivided attention. The posterior hippocampus, most associated with spatial navigation, was significantly larger in the taxi drivers than in a matched group of non-drivers. And the longer someone had been driving, the more pronounced the difference. The brain had physically changed in response to intensive spatial memory use. The default mode network needs unscheduled time to do its work. Constant stimulation, the endless noise of screens and notifications, interrupts the very processes that produce insight. Think in images when language becomes insufficient. When a problem resists description in words, try drawing it. Visualize it as a physical scenario. Run it as a mental experiment. Einstein's most powerful thinking happened before he reached for the mathematics. Stay inside uncertainty longer than feels comfortable. The impulse to resolve ambiguity quickly is strong and understandable, but premature resolution is the enemy of genuine insight. The answer that comes after 1 hour of thinking is almost always shallower than the one that comes after 10. Return one final time to the ceiling in Rome. Two hands reaching toward each other across a vast painted sky. For centuries we interpreted that image as a story about divine selection. God reaching down to a chosen few, gifting certain minds with the capacity for greatness while others watched from a distance. But modern neuroscience tells a different story, one that is quieter, less dramatic, and in many ways more extraordinary. The gap between ordinary thinking and extraordinary thinking is not filled in a single moment of inspiration. It is crossed millimeter by millimeter by the same motion made again and again. Curiosity returning to a question it was told to abandon. Attention holding steady when everything else insists on moving on. A mind staying inside a difficult problem just a little longer than it was comfortable doing. Einstein didn't cross that gap because his brain was fundamentally different. He crossed it because he never stopped reaching. Genius is not a gift placed into a brain before birth. Perhaps genius is what happens when a mind keeps extending toward a question it has not yet answered. And the most extraordinary thing neuroscience has revealed is not what was inside Einstein's skull. It is that the same capacity for sustained, deepening, ever-widening curiosity exists inside yours. Every neuron remembers, every thought changes you, every choice rewrites you. The gap is still there, the spark is still crossing. So become.